My name's Dave, and I live in Omaha, Nebraska. One evening, on August 15th, I was out on my porch, just shooting the breeze with my buddy Rick. We were sitting there, just talking about the Huskers' chances this season, when we heard some rustling in the cornfield next to my house. We figured it was probably a deer or a coyote, so we didn't pay it much mind. We kept chatting for another half hour or so when this weird smell hit us. It was kind of like wet dog, but worse. That's when I looked out into the field and saw this massive figure standing there, easily 8 or 9 feet tall. This thing was covered in dark, shaggy hair from head to toe. Its face looked kind of human, but also not. I felt my heart pounding in my chest as I jumped up, ran into the house, and locked the doors. My wife and kids were confused, asking why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. My wife even went out with a flashlight to check things out, but she didn't see anything. The next morning, my nephew and I went out to the field to see if we could find anything. We found patches of flattened corn and tracks leading off into the woods. We thought about following them, but we were too spooked by what we'd already found. Fast forward to a few weeks later, I was out in my deer stand for an early morning hunt. It was eerily quiet, which was the first thing that struck me as odd. Around 5 a.m., I heard a sound like 2 logs being banged together. I brushed it off as some construction noise from the new development over on the next hill. But then, I heard something moving up the hill behind me. I was annoyed, thinking someone was trespassing and ruining my hunt. But then, as the sun was just starting to rise, I saw this massive figure walking along the ridge. I grabbed my binoculars and got a good look at it. It wasn't a man. This thing had to be over 7 feet tall and easily 600 pounds. It was covered in dark hair, and its arms hung down past its knees. As soon as I put my binoculars down, it seemed to notice something and took off into the woods. The whole sighting couldn't have lasted more than 15 seconds. Just last week, I was at work with my cousin at our family-owned auto shop. It's located near the edge of town, right next to a big open field. We weren't very busy, so my cousin was just wandering around when he suddenly yelled for me to come over. I ran over to him and saw this big, hairy creature running down the hill on the other side of the field. It wasn't a bear. Bears can't run on 2 feet. This thing was huge, covered in hair, and moved incredibly fast. These experiences have been the most terrifying moments of my life. I don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't normal. It's made me see the Nebraska countryside in a whole new and somewhat frightening light. A few days later, I was at the local diner in Lincoln, just having a cup of coffee and trying to shake off the unease from my recent encounters. I was sitting there, staring into my mug when the local farmer, Bill, walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I asked him what was wrong, and he started telling me about this massive creature he'd seen in his cornfield. His description matched exactly what I'd seen. It was uncanny. Bill was a tough, no-nonsense kind of guy, and to see him rattled like this was unsettling. He told me he'd been out in his field, checking on his crops when he saw this huge figure standing in the corn. It was tall, covered in dark hair, and had a face that was part human, part something else. He said it looked at him, then turned and disappeared into the woods. Bill was visibly shaken, and I couldn't blame him. After all, I'd seen the same thing. A couple of weeks later, I was out fishing on the Platte River, trying to clear my head. It was a quiet morning, just the sound of the water and the birds. Suddenly I heard a loud splash upstream. I looked up and saw this huge, hairy figure standing on the riverbank. It was the same creature I'd seen before. It was looking right at me. I felt my heart hammering in my chest as I watched it. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it turned and disappeared into the trees. I've lived in Nebraska my whole life, and I've never seen anything like this. I don't know what it is or where it came from, but it's out there. It's made me look at the peaceful Nebraska countryside in a whole new light. I don't know what's out there, but I do know one thing. It's not just cornfields and Husker games anymore. There's something else out there, something big and frightening, and it's changed the way I see my home state forever. I'm a Nebraska native, born and raised. My family has a farm near the town of Broken Bow, right smack in the middle of the state. We're surrounded by the Sandhills, a region known for its rolling grasslands and sparse population. It's a quiet, peaceful place, perfect for farming and hunting. But back in November of 2007, I had an experience that still puzzles me to this day. I was home on leave from the Air Force, where I was serving as a major. My father and I decided to take advantage of the deer hunting season. We had 2 spots picked out, a tree stand for me and a ground blind for my dad. Our locations were set up in the wooded area to the west of our property, near the Middle Loop River. We'd head out into the woods about an hour before sunrise, settle into our spots, and wait for the deer to start moving. The first morning, on November 9th, we made our way into the woods and split up. I climbed up into my tree stand and got comfortable. Almost immediately, I heard 3 distinct knocks coming from the west. I figured it was just some other hunters in the area, so I didn't think much of it. But over the next 3 mornings, I heard the same knocking sounds again. They seemed to be coming from different directions each time. Once from the south, once from the east, and once from the north. I thought it might be a woodpecker or some other bird, but the knocks were too slow and deliberate. After watching a few episodes of Finding Bigfoot, I started to wonder if these could be the infamous wood knocks that Bigfoot enthusiasts often talk about. On the 4th morning, things got even stranger. I was in my tree stand, scanning the woods for any sign of deer, when I heard a strange, garbled sound coming from the north. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, a kind of low, grumbling chatter. Then I heard something large moving through the underbrush. A doe burst out of the trees, running full tilt, and stopped just a few yards from my tree stand. She was panting heavily and kept looking back towards the noise. The strange sounds and movement continued for a few more minutes. Then everything went quiet. The doe took off like a shot, disappearing into the woods. For the rest of the day, I had this odd feeling that I was being watched. I could hear something moving around in the woods, but I never saw anything. Over the next couple of days, that feeling of being watched didn't go away. I could hear something moving around in the woods, always just out of sight. It was too noisy to be a deer, but it seemed to be trying to stay hidden. I felt like I was being circled, like whatever it was curious about me, but didn't want to reveal itself. I've never been able to explain what happened those few days in November. I've heard all sorts of wildlife in the woods around our farm, but nothing that sounded like what I heard then. I'm not saying it was Bigfoot, but I can't say it wasn't either. It's just one of those mysteries that keeps me wondering. Back in 2003, I was working at a poultry farm in Platte, Nebraska, just east of the Platte River and south of US Highway 30. I'd grown up around there, small farming town, close-knit community, beautiful open spaces, and an abundance of wildlife. Every now and then we would hear odd noises during the evenings, but we always attributed them to coyotes or the occasional roaming cow. But what happened in October of that year had me scratching my head in confusion. It started on the morning of October 10th, 2003. We were out in the fields, about 1 hour before sunrise, when I heard 3 distinct knocks coming from the north. This wasn't unusual, except that the knocks were answered by similar sounds, each time from different directions: east, northeast, southeast. Over the next 4 mornings, the same pattern repeated. At first, I thought they were just sounds of the early morning woods waking up. The knocks reminded me of woodpeckers, but it was as if they were communicating with each other, which seemed peculiar. Jump to the year 2007, my wife and I were living just outside of town, in the low rolling hills of Thayer County. Early one September morning, we were jolted awake by a scream. It was high-pitched, almost like a woman in terror, but it didn't quite sound human. I rushed to check on our kids, but they were fast asleep. The scream lasted for a few moments, and then there was silence, leaving us wondering about the source. In the morning, I listened to recordings of bobcats, foxes, and even mountain lions. While some sounds were similar, none were a perfect match. A few months later, we had friends visiting and decided to have a backyard barbecue. As we sat around chatting, we heard a rustling sound in the nearby woods. We shone our flashlights and saw nothing. Our dog, who usually barks at the slightest provocation, whimpered and ran back towards the house. That sent little jitters down my arm. It was an eerie feeling. And then, the unthinkable happened. One evening in July, a large branch from an oak tree right in our front yard seemingly uprooted itself and landed straight up, embedded in the ground. It was almost like a giant had plucked it and stabbed it into the soil. A quick storm during the night, perhaps? Except the sky was clear, and no other trees were disturbed. To say it was freaky would be the understatement of the year. As a man of science, I always search for reasonable explanations, but these incidents have baffled me. I don't know if Bigfoot roams Nebraska country, as some locals like to claim. I have always laughed that off until now. Now, when asked if I believe, I simply say, well, stranger things have happened. Back in the summer of 2011, my buddies and I decided to take a camping trip out near the Niobrara River, spanned by the majestic Cowboy Bridge in Valentine, Nebraska. We were in our early 20s, still sturdy in our belief of invincibility, but itching for adventure. The first night was typical: setting up camp, lighting a fire, sipping cheap beer, trying to outdo each other with wild tales. The kind of night you'd expect from a group of young guys left unsupervised in the wild. But boy, did things take a drastic turn on night 2. After some fishing and a hearty meal, we decided to call it an early night in anticipation of the next morning's planned hike. We felt snug inside our small tents. The night was nothing more than a soft murmur of wind whistling through the pines, the occasional chirp of a cricket. But that didn't last long. Around midnight, just as we were dozing off, we heard a strange noise, something that sounded sort of like a low grunt or a muffled growl. Now, I have heard coyotes and raccoons cause mischief at campsites before, but this was different. It was deeper, more guttural, like it was coming from a huge creature. Moreover, it didn't seem very far, like it was right there in the camping ground, maybe even watchfully lurking somewhere near the outskirts. It was terrifying. We all heard it, causing a flurry of whispers and muffled exclamations. After a hushed group discussion, we all kind of brushed it off, concluding that too much beer was playing tricks on our minds. It wasn't until morning that we realized it was something more than beer and overactive imaginations. Just behind our campsite, we found these massive footprints, similar in shape to a human but on a much larger scale. As a 6FT guy wearing size 11 boots, I was dwarfed by these impressions. Even several yards apart, you could tell that whatever had made them was big. And the thing that rattled us the most? The footprints led straight to our camp and back to the wooded area again. Of course, many think we just saw bare footprints, but as an avid outdoorsman, I know what those look like. These were different. For one, the stride was much longer, and the outline of the foot seemed to resemble a giant, bare human foot, rather than the compact, rounded paw of a bear. For the remainder of the trip, we couldn't shake off the sense of being watched, and it rattled us enough to cut our excursion short. We never saw what left those footprints or heard that sound again, but something about the experience stuck with us. Even with the passing of years, we still look back at that night with a shiver, each of us left with our theories about what it may have been. Was it a Bigfoot? We'll probably never know, but the experience left us with a lingering sense of the unknown that's hard to shake. To wrap it up, it was a spine-tingling experience, a little horrifying even, but in hindsight, it did put a little edge to our otherwise mundane camping trip. I just wanted to share my experience with you all, in hopes that maybe someone out there has encountered something similar. Take it easy. Till next time. Last summer, 2020, in the midst of all the pandemic chaos, my friends and I were out riding our dirt bikes around some of the rural parts of Nebraska. The town we live in is called Wilbur, the Czech capital of the U.S., which is situated just south of Lincoln. Anyway, we often worked our way out on Route 41 towards DeWitt, and even further to Nebraska City if the thrill was upon us. But this particular day, we rode out on an old abandoned dirt trail just off the Highway 103 towards Plymouth. As we rumbled along, the wind in our faces and the noise of the engines filling the air, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Over a ridge of downed trees past a long, open stretch, I saw something crouched low and hiding. I remember thinking it was maybe a stray dog or a large raccoon, but as I slowed down my bike and squinted through the summer haze, I realized it wasn't any ordinary animal. The creature slowly stood, hunched over at first, as if cautious and wary of us, another peculiar habit for a wild animal. It wasn't until it straightened and stood on two legs that my heart started pounding like a runaway drum in my chest. The creature had an almost human-like walk, but its body was covered in dull brown furs, resembling the hazy umber of the summer-dried grass around. The creature's eyes stared at me, glowing in the sunlight, a chilling image that stuck with me. As it moved slowly, maintaining an intense gaze at me before swiftly darting towards the embankment by the roadside. By this time, my friends had pulled up, and we watched together as this strange creature launched itself up the embankment and disappeared into the brush. It even hurtled over a fallen tree with the grace and ease of an Olympic athlete. During another incident a couple years back while out with my trusty dog, Buster. Buster and I were hiking around near Sioux City when he stopped dead in his tracks and let out a low growl. I looked over and there stood what I believe was the same creature I'd spotted years before. This time, having seen it before, I wasn't as taken aback, but it didn't hinder the surge of adrenaline pulsing through my veins. A couple summers ago, I was driving down a picturesque rural road towards the town of Fairbury, just outside of Gage County. The summer foliage was breathtaking, I remember thinking to myself. As I rounded a bend, I was startled by a large, hulking figure stepping onto the road from the underbrush. I slammed the brakes of the car, and the figure turned to face me. It was taller than any human, easily upwards of 8 to 10 feet, and complete with the same heavy coat of brown fur I'd seen before. I slowed the car to a crawl as the creature swiftly crossed the road and disappeared into the wilderness on the other side. Just last year, another incident happened on the outskirts of Nebraska City. The creature practically matched the descriptions from my previous encounters, all except it was larger, loomed more threateningly. It stood still, as though sizing me up before it made off into the dense copse of trees. Is this bizarre? Absolutely. Is there ridicule? You bet. But that doesn't make the experiences any less real, any less fearful. Nebraska may be known for its cornfields, but the wilderness holds mysteries of its own. These strange encounters with the unknown, they piece together a chilling narrative that I can't help wonder about. Who knows what creatures lurk out there? So that's it, my encounters with the unknown. Anecdotes from dusty roads and old trails leading to the heart of the rural parts of Nebraska. It's out there, folks, and I've seen it. No punchline, no moral of the story, just a simple tale of something I can't explain. And maybe, just maybe, there'll be someone else out there with a similar experience to back up my own. Thanks for hearing me out. I'll do my best I can to tell you everything with as much detail as possible. It's really made me rethink everything I thought I understood about the world around us. This tale goes back to the mid-90s, in the heart of the Omaha Council Bluffs metropolitan area in eastern Nebraska. This area is home to the Missouri River, abundant woodlands, and several historic trails. It's also where my friends and I love to hit the trails on our off-road bikes. It was a warm summer day in '96, the kind of day that made you forget all your worries. Just us and our dirt bikes on the winding paths in the Loess Hills. We'd been trailing down this old abandoned road, which ran parallel to the new highway near the town of Crescent. We were headed north, unaware of what awaited us. As we neared a pile of fallen trees obstructing the path, a subtle movement caught my eye. There, sitting low to the ground, was a creature, looking as startled to see us as we were it. It seemed to be either trying to stay hidden, or it was watching the cars zipping by on the highway. As we drew closer, I saw the beast turn its head in our direction, its eyes reflecting our disbelief. As it got up, I realized the creature was unlike any I had come across before. The large creature rose slowly, staying somewhat hunched, almost as if trying to maintain its low profile, moving on 2 feet, shuffling around like a human would. The sight was enough to get my heart pounding and my adrenaline surging. The creature ambled into the middle of the road, paused, and seemed to weigh its options. It looked towards a steep embankment on the right, probably judging the escape route. As my friends caught up to me, I was yelling to them to take a look at this bizarre sight. The creature was covered head to toe in fur. Its fur was dull and resembled that of a moose or deer. It had long arms, but its legs were somewhat shorter. The creature had a face, but it was too dark to make out anything except the eyes. They were gleaming, likely due to the sunlight bouncing off them, since we had the sun behind us. It resembled a gorilla, with its hunched posture and bulky build. Taking its gaze off me, it slowly approached the sloping bank next to the road and proceeded to vault up with a surprising lightness. It then disappeared into the trees on the other side of the bank. For a brief moment, it seemed to have vanished, but then I spotted it again, moving at a rapid pace, weaving through the trees with an agility that belied its size. The sight was incredible and terrifying at the same time. Moving forward to the summer of '05, in the wooded expanses of the Niobrara State Park. I was on a horse ride with my trusty white gelding, whom I lovingly call Spark. It was nearing twilight, with the sun casting long, eerie shadows everywhere. We were about 2 miles away from my camp when Spark suddenly came to a halt. He stood absolutely still, carefully observing something in the woods. I followed his gaze and spotted a tall white creature approaching us at a breakneck pace. It was so absurdly similar to Spark in appearance that for a moment I thought that my horse had somehow duplicated himself. When the creature reached a distance of about 30 yards, it stopped abruptly and spun around, dashing behind the trees. It seemed to vanish into thin air. I felt a surge of fear and excitement that amplified my senses. I wanted to investigate, but the fear took over. I have carried the regret of not exploring further, and I continue to relive that moment in my dreams. Years later, I was driving down a rural road with my buddy Rick towards County Road 6 near Bartley. The scenery was picturesque, with the midday sun sparkling on the asphalt. That's when I saw it. A tall humanoid figure, covered in hair, stepping out from the cluster of trees onto the road about 100 yards ahead. It crossed the road within a blink and vanished on the other side. Despite our eagerness, we couldn't find any signs of the creature when we crossed that same spot moments later. I guess while this email is a bit long and seem unbelievable, it was important for me to share my experiences. As strange as it may sound, I feel we're not alone in our understanding of the world. If anything, these encounters have proven to me that the world remains wide, deep, and full of mysteries we have yet to understand. Thanks for giving me a platform to tell my story. This whole event unfolded in the heart of our Midwestern state, Nebraska. It was around February 18th, 2016, and my mate James and I decided to make use of the holiday season for an adventure. Not needing much prodding, we quickly agreed on a trek through the 4 Mile Creek State Wildlife Area in Dakota City, west of Sioux City. This had always been our spot, ever since our childhood years when our parents took us hunting there. Now, it's a widely spread piece of land, some rough, some flat, but always teeming with wildlife. From deer to pheasants, it always had our inner explorers yearning for more. We embarked on this journey not only for the thrill of adventure, but also to investigate a sudden dip in deer sightings in the area. It was an uncanny decrease, and it raised questions among the local hunting community. So off we went. We took an arduous path through the dense woods, heading towards the 4 Mile Creek. Only the footprints of rabbits and the occasional fox disrupted the untouched snow. We talked and laughed along the way, the thought of any mysterious creature far from our minds. I mean, come on, who would actually believe in something like that today? Our anticipation grew as we hoped to uncover the reason behind the wildlife's unusual scarcity. Halfway around, we stumbled upon something peculiar. Faint, deep, and evenly spaced footprints in the snow marching down from a small slope by the creek. These footprints were clearly created by a 2-legged creature, and despite our best estimates, the strides were a good 50 to 60 inches apart. Too long for a human, even a sprinting one, and clearly not an animal's since no one could picture a deer adopting a bipedal mode of locomotion anytime soon. We marked the spot, took a couple of pictures, and continued our adventure, still clueless about our big discovery. The evening came down slowly, and the nocturnal orchestra began, but never for a second did we feel a single tingling sensation or any odd sensations. It seemed like any other Nebraska evening in the woods, full of calm and tranquility. As the night grew louder, we set up our tent near the creek, always excited for some night fishing, and to see what the next day would bring. On waking up, our excitement turned into shock as we discovered the same footprints leading straight to our camp. We were sure they weren't there when we turned in, chilling as that thought was. The realization got our adrenaline pumping, and no amount of breakfast s'mores could shake the astonishment we felt throughout the day. The foot strides became our primary focus, sidelining the missing deer mystery. We followed the tracks which led us to a rocky outcrop later that day. It was there that we found a collection of branches that seemed unnaturally arranged, almost like a crude nesting area. They were gruesomely intertwined and covered in the same deep red-brown hair we found near the footprints. Still shocked and clueless, we decided to call it a day and head back toward our city lives, while promising each other to delve deeper into this on our next holiday. So there you go, our story. We're still not sure what it was. Bigfoot in Nebraska? Well, life, as they say, is full of surprises, isn't it? Anyway, just wanted to share our tale with you and see what everyone thinks. First off, this is a very long story, so I'll do my best I can to tell you everything with as much detail as possible. Now let me just say, I am not one for spinning tales, but this is indeed an account of the peculiar things I've faced in pastoral Nebraska. My job takes me out into the wilderness quite frequently. I am a park ranger. The job is not, however, as idyllic as one might think. Strange stories and bizarre occurrences are part and parcel of what I do, but some tales are indeed harder to ignore than others. Being a park ranger in Nebraska means I get to see quite a bit of the state. We've got a diverse range of terrains here, from the soaring cliffs and waterfalls of Smith Falls State Park to the endless wild grasslands of the Nebraska National Forest. One day, you could be strolling through the iconic Chimney Rock. Another day, you'll find yourself deep inside the sand hills. It's a grand old job, but it isn't without its oddities. The first account I'd like to air is about an incident that happened up near the Pine Ridge area. Now, Pine Ridge is a nature lover's dream. Wildlife is abundant. Its hills host plenty of lush greenery, and the views are out of this world. But like all beautiful things, it has its sinister elements, which were not initially obvious to me. This occurrence happened around 2 years ago, when I was on one of my usual patrols. As I was doing the rounds and admiring the morning sun, I noticed something that stopped me dead in my tracks. Just off a beaten path, some yards away, stood a solitary staircase. Just bare staircase, in the middle of nature's playground, in a place where it plainly shouldn't be. So out of place that at first, I laughed it off thinking someone was pulling some kind of prank. However, when I approached to investigate further, the air around me seemed to change. Laughter was replaced by a sense of disquiet that hovered like a dense fog in mind. The staircase, gray and constructed of what seemed to be concrete, looked ordinary, yet it radiated an aura that cast a sinister blanket over the sunny day. I was impelled to climb it, an inexplicable force coercing me to ascend. Hearing the echo of age-old tales, I ignored it and moved on. But the image and feeling have stuck with me since like a nasty burr. Next story that has stuck with me is one from a few miles south of the Niobrara River, a place which isn't alien to old Native American myths. I befriended Dale, a man who was from the local Ponca tribe. He once told me about his uncle who had experienced something unexplainable near the banks of the river. This was around the 70s, Dale recalls. His uncle was out fishing one evening. Under the rusty setting sun, he saw something wade into the river. At first, he chalked it up to a deer. But as it grew closer, the shape began to distort and took on a humanoid figure. The figure was uncannily tall and seemed off balance, as if struggling to keep itself upright. Now, Dale's uncle was a tough, no-nonsense kind of man, but that sight, as he later told Dale, stole his courage. Hurrying home, he retold his ordeal. The stories of the Waterman, a legendary shape-shifting entity, was passed around that night. Fast forward to today, every time I patrolled around Niobrara River, even in the nicest of weathers, a frosty sensation would clutch my heart, reminding of Dale's story. Could it be the Waterman? There's more such tales and anecdotes, some subtler than others. Things that shouldn't be, places that always seem to be under a shadow, all become a part of our everyday life. It's a strange mix of love for nature's beauty and acceptance of her concealed oddities. And amidst all these, our work goes on. That there are strange happenings to be experienced in this line of work is an understatement. However, we take the rough with the smooth. Fear subsides, but the intrigue remains. And despite all these peculiar incidents, the Nebraska wilderness remains close to my heart. It's a kind of bewitching charm that I don't think I could ever properly explain. But I guess that's just the nature of the job, quite literally. You won't believe the experiences I've been having lately. You see, I work as a park ranger in Chadron State Park, located in northern Nebraska. It's a gorgeous area, full of ponderosa pines and rolling hills. But let's just say its natural beauty isn't the only thing that's captured my attention recently. It's kind of hard to put into words what I've been encountering. Let's just say it's not the kind of thing you'd expect or even prepare for in my line of work. Now, I've heard stories from older guys in the service, the kind of stories you'd share around a campfire to get a rise out of the newbies. But as you might imagine, working as a ranger, you end up witnessing strange things all the same. things that don't necessarily fit within the boundaries of understood reality. One thing that started to strike me as particularly weird has to do with stairs. Yes, you heard me right. Stairs. Standalone staircases, just in the middle of the woods, not attached to anything or leading anywhere. One afternoon, I was out making routine checks around the Pelican Point State Recreation Area, roughly 45 minutes or so from the park. As I walked along the path, my eyes were drawn to something strange. I kid you not, a set of stairs, in the middle of nowhere. They were ornately constructed, like something you'd see in a grand old Victorian mansion, and they were pristine. It was uncanny. And let me tell you, Lon, I had this gut-wrenching sensation like my instincts screaming at me to keep my distance. But let me take you back a bit. Before I experienced this, I got to hear a disturbing story from a fellow ranger. Let's call her E. One morning, she was patrolling near Smith Falls State Park, which is all the way over on the other side of Nebraska. A dense fog had settled, reducing visibility to a significant extent. As she passed by a dense thicket of trees, she saw something. It was a man, E said, but something was dreadfully wrong with him. His face, according to her, was all wrong. Not like he was deformed, but disproportionate. His features were too large for his head, like they'd been inflated or something. E said when she saw him, she just froze. She watched him walk out from the underbrush, cross the pathway, and disappear into the fog. As he walked past her, the air suddenly got chilly, like a winter freeze had just swept through. Another peculiar story comes from one of my young pal named S. He was out on a camping trip with his girlfriend near Keller Park State Recreation Area. In the middle of the night, they started to hear a strange grinding noise that kept them awake. S tried to reassure his girlfriend, saying it was probably some animal and they should just ignore the sound. But everything changed when he woke up a few hours later to find his girlfriend missing from the tent. He found her at the edge of their campsite, in a stupor, her eyes vacant, like she was sleepwalking. In front of her was a set of stone stairs leading to nowhere. She kept muttering about needing to ascend the stairs, and he had to practically drag her away from them. Lon, I could tell you a dozen more tales, all with their unique, spine-chilling details. But the unnerving consistency in them is these mysterious staircases. You'd think a staircase in the middle of Nebraska's forest would elicit awe or amusement rather than fear. Instead, everyone who encounters these stairs feels an immediate sense of dread, a primal fear unlike anything else. It's as if they are an aberration, an affront to nature that our instincts immediately recognize as wrong. What's peculiar is the secrecy around these things. Conversations about these stairs are taboo, yet they are there, eerily quiet and waiting. It feels like we're hiding a sinister secret about our beloved state parks. These experiences have left a deep impact on all of us who've encountered these stairs, and I thought it was about time these stories were brought to light. All said and done, I'd love to hear if you or anyone else has heard of anything like these stairs in the wilderness. I hope this email finds you well. My name is Dan, and I hail from a small town right outside Broken Bow in central Nebraska. I'm an avid outdoorsman, so natural phenomena are pretty much routine for me. You see, I've been hunting and fishing in this neck of the woods since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. However, in all my years of poking around the wild, what I experienced a few nights ago was anything but routine. I've got a story that might just grip you. It was a cool, crisp fall evening, just about perfect for a spot of deer hunting. The weather was on our side with just enough of a breeze to diffuse our scents, which is always a welcome gift on a hunting evening. The heart of the wooded area was a location that I knew like the back of my hand. The plan was simple. My old man and I, two seasoned deer hunters, set up to start the hunt from different tracks. I was positioned more to the south. This made sense as I was younger and could manage the rougher terrain. Now my old man, bless his heart, was always a beacon of sorts on our hunts. His little flashlight was frequent reassurance bobbing slightly as he trekked, visible from the farthest corners of the dark woods due north. And that evening, it was no different. I spotted his light twinkling distantly to my right as I prepared myself for the hunt. All was perfectly usual, until something really unsettling occurred. My father, on reaching his designated spot, stirred up something that let out an atrocious, unbearable stench, worse than a rotten carcass left in the sun too long. It was immediately followed by the cacophony of something plowing through the woods, like a locomotive let loose, barreling right past where I was hidden on its way past, releasing that intense, nauseating odor as it whooshed by. The commotion was too loud, too heavy to be a mere deer. My heart pounded like a drum, and I barely remember holding my breath, praying for daylight to chase away the fear. Fast forward to a later hunt, this one at the far end of the Claybank Swamp, a favorite spot since I was a lad. A usual day it was, does aplenty, but the bucks were elusive as ever. Apparently the setting sun had other plans. An ear-piercing shriek erupted from the direction of the north, an unfamiliar animalistic scream which sent a jolt of alarm through me. It was succeeded by a distinct crack sound, like a substantial branch had been roughly snapped. For a moment I just sat there, perplexed, eyes wide, trying to comprehend what had just occurred. Then prudence took over, and my Crow 30-40 rifle was promptly off safety. Although something urged me to bolt right out of the swamp, I convinced myself that flight would only instigate a chase. So maintaining a calm exterior, I steadily made my way to the car parked a reasonable distance away, all along a feeling of dread creeping up on me. I got to the car, started the engine, and left my door ajar. I put my old faithful Smith & Wesson 357 on the roof, just in case I needed it in a hurry. By then, my attention was being abruptly drawn to some heavy swale close by from where I had just emerged. To my surprise, something huge, bulkily built, and easily about 8 feet tall, lingered there. It stood on 2 legs, silently staring. Quickly, I grabbed the Smith & Wesson, hopped into the car, and in no time, I was a good quarter-mile away. The experience left me severely shaken, and took me several years to gather the courage to revisit the Claybank Swamp for hunting. Nowadays, I'm back to my routine, inclining towards the belief that what lurked in the swamp was, perhaps, a Sasquatch, unusually intriguing yet seemingly harmless. Fast forward to a snowy morning in April 2008, when I was trying to get back home in the woods. We had a severe snowstorm that made the roads impassable, and I had to park my 4WD SUV quite a distance from my home. The snow was so heavy that my footsteps left deep imprints behind me. Curiously, I spotted another set of footprints, undeniably large, practically twice the size of mine, and about 4 feet apart. The paw prints were outstandingly clear, but their bearer? A mystery that looms to this day. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to believing in creatures like Bigfoot, but my logic was defied by what I had witnessed that day. The giant footprints, that creature by the swamp. Certainly, there's more to these woods than what meets the eye. I wanted to share this with you and your readers, Lon, in the hope that someone out there might have had a similar experience or at least shed some light on what these strange occurrences could mean. Guess I'm still finding adventures in these woods, even after all these years. I'm sending this email your way with my jaw still on the ground from disbelief. Never in my wildest dreams had I thought I'd encounter something so strange, so unsettling, right here in Nebraska. But here I am, about to spill a story that keeps replaying in my mind and disturbing my peace ever since it happened. It occurred just last week, deep in the dense woods of Pinecrest Farms, Beatrice. Gage County has always been my eternal hunting ground. I've hunted deer in these parts since my father first handed me a .308 Winchester when I was 11 years old. I could tell you stories about hunting deer, of spending quiet autumn evenings in the heart of the woods with nothing but the rustling leaves and distant bird calls as company. But this story I'm about to recount is entirely different. Something that felt so out of place. It was like a local skydiver landing in New York's Times Square during rush hour. My nephew Billy, all of 12 years old and full of the youthful adventurism of that age, wanted to experience a real deer hunt. So we packed up our gear and hit the trail near Pawnee City. We were in the thick of the Nemaha River area, further than we usually go, but Billy was insistent. As twilight was drawing closer, and the Woodland Orchestra was readying to play their Twilight Symphony, we decided to call it a day. We had barely started our trek back, when an impressive 8-pointer sped past us, a mere 30 yards ahead. Its eyes wide with fear, the deer darted towards the south with an intensity I had never seen in all my years of hunting. But what gave me a fright wasn't the deer, it was what was chasing it. Shadowing the deer, at a speed and agility I've never seen, was a creature straight out of a cryptid documentary. The creature I recognized as a Sasquatch from numerous stories and sketches I've seen online and heard from other hunters. It was a towering, ominous figure, around 8 foot tall, lumbering with a surreal speed. It was as if a walking tree had suddenly sprouted legs and started sprinting, but with an unmistakable, intimidating humanity to its movement. We locked eyes, Billy, me and the creature, for a split second that may as well have lasted hours. Its dark, almost black eyes expressed more surprise than threat, reflecting our own feelings at that point. We stood frozen for a while, the safety of our rifles clicking off as we regained our senses. Billy, still buzzing with adrenaline, wanted to explore more, but I convinced him to head back. I knew the Pinecrest topography like the back of my hand, and I knew exactly where the creature was heading, towards the open fields of Jewell County, Kansas. I proposed to Billy that the Sasquatch would regroup and likely continue the hunt after we were long gone. As crazy as it sounds, we were back out there again the next morning, Billy's curiosity getting the better of my unease. We found no sign of the creature or the deer it hunted, just a chilling silence hanging over the place where this extraordinary encounter had occurred. Fast forward to last night. I was in Lincoln, at the Haymarket district. As I was entering the parking lot, I looked towards the building rooftops, and there it was. An enormous, almost 10-foot-tall figure slowly making its way across. It stopped abruptly, seeming to sense my gaze, and stood frozen for a few seconds before it quickly disappeared. My mind raced back to the creature in Pinecrest. Could it be the same one? Through all my years, the woods have never felt alien to me until now. Now, my refuge feels invaded, the tranquility marred by some strange entity. But I'm keeping my composure, Lon, because that's what hunters do, right? We stay calm, observe, gather stories worth sharing. I'll sign off now, Lon, before I ramble on into oblivion. Keep doing your wonderful work. There are plenty of us out here with extraordinary tales to tell, seeking solace, seeking understanding. Take care and stay safe. Last week, in the thrumming heart of Nebraska, I found myself neck-deep in a bizarre encounter that knocked the breath out of me and tinted everything since in a weird glow of bewilderment. It truly feels as if I've stumbled upon a mystery that's got me thinking about you and your remarkable website. A haven for folks like me, who've stared into the extraordinary face of our everyday world and glimpsed the unexplainable. When I came across your passion for the unusual, for the narratives that twirl at the fringe of our understanding, I realized that you might just appreciate hearing my story, an authentic Midwestern cryptozoological account. So here I am, weaving the strands of a baffling experience and hoping they will find a place in your collection of such stories that dare to venture into the unknown. We were nestled in the farthest reach of the Sandhills, an odd geographical quirk that coats our state in a rugged and wild reputation. This vast landscape, laid out like a heaving blanket of undulating mystery, hunkered under the raw Nebraska elements, was the backdrop to our inexplicable experience. This wasn't just another rough piece of the landscape for us. It felt like an accomplice, a silent witness to the undeniable drama that unfolded during our expedition. My son, a quick-witted lad of 12 with an insatiable appetite for the untamed, and I had shouldered our hunting gear with optimism and excitement, the bounty of a deer in our minds accentuating the anticipation of a day well spent in the great outdoors of the Smith Lake near Valentine. We were getting our fill of father-son bonding under the shielding Nebraska sky. The spiced air of camaraderie drenched us, the hunt, the vast open canvas of wilderness, and the promise of a decent buck tying us together in a shared mission. As the day leaned into its twilight hours, the horizon kissed by a purple cloak of dusk, we packed our gear, realizing that it was time to retreat from the wilderness. We hadn't gone far, only about 60 or so yards into the wild, when a massive 8-point buck hurtled past us like a bullet shot from an unseen firearm. The air, displaced by its frenzied rush, swirled around us. The astonishing sight that followed nearly killed my adrenaline-fueled heart with shock, as trailing the deer was a massive figure, a hulking entity, black and large and terrifying. It seemed to throw itself after the deer with the desperation of a starved predator. The creature exuded a sense of dark folklore, seemed almost legendary. A hulking Bigfoot-like figure almost 9 feet tall with a coat of shaggy darkness, its arms outstretched in hot pursuit of its frantic prey. The atmosphere shifted then, threaded with an unspoken surprise, as my son turned to look at me with large, bewildered eyes. "What just happened, Dad?" His voice was a quiet tremor in the cool evening air. As the reality of what we had just witnessed slithered under our skin, he whispered in awe, "Did we just experience a Bigfoot moment? Something else danced at the edge of his young, awe-struck eyes. Curiosity was setting in. The safety of the rifle still warm in my hand was an icy realization. After a moment of silence, I acknowledged his question with a nod. We were both swimming in a pool of astonishment and disbelief. Days later, the silhouette-like image of the creature stuck to our thoughts like a burr. Even when we revisited the spot, the breeze heavy with silence and expectation, we found nothing. Our minds began to weave around the idea of meandering back into the years when I was a robust, corn-fed 40-year-old working in North Platte, Nebraska. I worked at a cooperative for local corn farmers back then, and had crossed paths with something equally hair-raising. A silhouetted giant, enormous, vaguely humanoid but extraordinarily colossal, about 9 to 10 feet tall, gliding across the ridge under a moonlit sky, thousands of stars acting as celestial spectators. These peculiar experiences have left me pondering and opened my eyes to the fact that there might be corners of this earth where the unknown has pitched its tent. Now I'm convinced. Bigfoot isn't just about whispered legends. It thrives in the Nebraska wilderness. My son is enthralled with the concept and shares my belief. Far from being scared, he now carries the thrill of a young adventurer, ready to debunk popular skepticism surrounding such enigmatic creatures. Looking back, I keep wondering, could the creature my son and I saw be the same being I encountered those many years ago? Perhaps they're all over the Midwestern plains, skulking in the tall trees and dense foliage. With our sightings and the retellings of encounters on your website, it's become blazingly apparent. We're not alone in our experiences, and these otherworldly creatures have been seen by many. That's pretty much the gist of my story. Just another regular Midwest guy narrating an unconventional tale of mysteries here. My name's Randy, and boy do I have a story that I've stayed quiet about for way too long. I've read enough accounts on this site to know someone out there might have an answer, or, heck, even experienced something similar. So I figured it's high time I shared my hair-raising encounter with you and your readers. A little background. I was a truck driver back in 2007, working for this shipping company that had me crisscrossing all over the state of Nebraska. You know, when you cover a place long enough, it becomes a part of you. It's scenery etched into the mind. I've seen enough sunrises from the confines of my cab to last a lifetime, the kind that made the heartland look like this perpetual postcard. Frankly, those sunrises became my company during the long, solitary drives. But what I saw one night on a fairly routine drive, it wasn't a sunrise. It wasn't nearly as reassuring or calming. It was something else. Something that's haunted my quiet moments ever since. I was heading from Chadron to Lincoln one evening, the semi humming a comforting lullaby as I coasted down Highway 2. This particular path cuts through the Nebraska National Forest. I've always loved that stretch. It's got an eerie kind of beauty, all peaceful and quiet, the road lined with imposing trees like a natural tunnel of solitude. It was past midnight, the only light being the pale, ghostly beams from my semi's headlights. Suddenly, my headlights catch this creature. A pair of hauntingly red eyes blink back. My heart was whipping against my chest like a trapped bird. It stood there, higher than any deer I've ever seen, and I've seen plenty being on the road as much as I am. By that point, I'm whipping down the highway, the monotonous rhythm of the asphalt beneath my tires pulling me into a kind of hypnotic stupor. This creature, whatever it was, yanked me back to a harsh reality. I stomped on the brakes out of instinct and shock. The truck lurched forward, and a moonlit cloud of dust erupted from beneath the skidding tires. Once the dust settled and the cloud cover overhead parted, what materialized in my headlights was something out of a nightmare. I kid you not, I was staring at a creature that had to be at least 9 feet tall, with arms so long they hung down to its knees. It had an intimidating hulk, and its silhouette was like nothing I've seen before, seeming to even dwarf the semi I was in. I was frozen behind the wheel, my heart pounding, deadlocked in a stare down with this beast. It was covered in what looked like thick, coarse fur that had this unearthly glow in the moonlight. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but probably only lasted a few seconds. Before I could gather my wits, the creature broke our deadlock. It turned its back on me and just walked away, as calmly as you please. It had this odd grace, each step almost fluid, even casual, as it disappeared into the shadows of the forest. As it left, it whirled around one last time to fix those hellish red eyes on me, before melting into the blackness. I sat there, shaking and stunned. Once I got back my senses, I noticed this smell, rotten and strangely sweet, lingering in the air, a testament of the reality of the event. It is an odor I've never encountered before or since. Highway 2 was my solemn sanctuary, its familiar rhythm an old friend, lulling me into an unsaid peace. I thought I knew that route inside out, had tamed it. But after that encounter, it felt different. Every subsequent night drive was tinged with unease, tinged with a feeling of anticipation, like waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm sorry if this sounds like some crazy rambling, but your website has been such a great platform for folks like me who've bumped into things that should be fabled. I can't help but hope that my story might resonate with someone else who has encountered that same monstrosity on that forsaken stretch of highway. Thanks for lending me your ear and your time.